Ready? Okay, so we're going to talk about the Maypole, specifically the Maypole of Merrymount. So I think it is a UU obligation. It's written in some bylaw somewhere that May Day you have to read an excerpt from Hawthorne's short story, The Maypole of Merrymount. Because every year I see and hear it referenced. But what's not referenced is he has a little preface before he even starts the story, and very few of his stories have a preference. All of his novels do, but short stories, not so much. So if you ever get your hands on a copy, it's in his book, Twice Told Tales. It was the first collection of short stories he wrote. And he has this to say before he jumps into writing about the Maypole of Merrymount. He says, there is an admirable foundation for a philosophic romance in the curious history of the early settlement of Mount Wollaston, or Merrymount. In the slight sketch here attempted, the facts recorded on the grave pages of our New England annalists have wrought themselves almost spontaneously into a sort of allegory. The masks, mummeries, and festive customs described in the text are in accordance with the manners of the age. Authority on these points may be found in Strutt's Book of English Sports and Pastimes. So there you go. He's giving you a source. You can go look it up. But right off the bat, he's going to say, look, I'm just going to tell you what really happened. And he's like, history itself has done the heavy lifting. I don't need to do much because this is going to be a philosophic romance, an allegory, if you will. So we're just going to see if Hawthorne was right as we walk through the story of the Maypole of Merrymount, or as he calls it, and other people have called it, Mount Wollaston. Mount Wollaston, you can actually go there. It is, in my mind, a bit misleading to call it a mount of any type, but whatever. A hillock doesn't sound as good as a mount. But it's in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is now a suburb of Boston. So you can go there. It's now a park. Mount Wollaston is a park. You can go there. You can, if you want, see where the Maypole was at some point in time. So as we're going to do this, I'm going to show you some readings and we're going to have some pictures because they're just too good not to show. So I'm going to share my screen. And we are going to do a PowerPoint because that's what friends do. They share PowerPoints together. Let's see, slideshow. There we go. So to lift a phrase from Hawthorne, we're going to call this jollity versus gloom. And so who's being jolly, who's being gloomy? It's not going to be really that hard to figure out because we're going to immediately go into two portraits of the main players. And there you go. You can probably guess who is going to be the gloomy one and who is going to be the jolly one. You have the one cast in shadow and the one who looks like he's constantly being surprised. So on the one side, we have Thomas Morton. Thomas Morton is, well, that's a funny thing. We don't know a whole lot about his early life, apart from what he says and maybe some contextual clues. We know he's probably a lawyer that turned into a businessman. So the worst of the worst. He was educated. He's running in some sort of aristocratic circles of some sort. He seems to have some knowledge of what is happening in Queen Elizabeth's court in England in the late 1500s. So he's connected in some way because What that connection is, though, is very hazy, because why would somebody who's completely connected to the court end up in New England amidst all of these Puritans? So there's something in his story that he doesn't tell us, and we don't know, but we know he has some powerful friends from how his history turns out. More about him as we keep going. And then on the other hand, we have William Bradford. William Bradford is one of the leaders of a type of Puritan we call the Separatists. Okay, now we have to do a quick stop about Puritans. And Puritanism is a different type of Protestantism. So England is going back and forth at this time between Catholicism and Anglicanism. And then we have a different type of Protestantism known as Puritanism. And that is, as H.L. Mencken says, Puritanism is the haunting fear that someone somewhere is happy. And Puritanism just thinks that the lot of them are wrong. They're a very serious religion. They don't want to see dancing. They don't want to see that music. Poetry is going way too far for them. They just want scripture and prayer and hard work. And even then, if you smile while you're doing that, you've crossed a line. Now, there's two types of Puritans. There's the, well, for lack of a better word, we'll call them the mainstream Puritans. They are still technically a part of the Anglican Church. They're a subgroup within it, and they're trying to reform the Anglican Church from within and correct its waywardness. But then there's another group that says Anglicanism is too hard to reform. We just have to start all over. And so they leave, and they are now called the Separatists. William Bradford is part of that branch. So they're originally going to the Netherlands because the Netherlands is known for being tolerant of all sorts of strangeness, and that includes Puritanism. So the Dutch said, yeah, Puritans, you can come over to Holland. And they gave them a bit of land. But when the Puritans then started trying to convert the Dutch to their way of life, that did not go over so well. In fact, it started going the exact opposite, and Bradford became very, very concerned that too many of the youth were being corrupted by those liberal Dutch. And so he's like, we have to figure out a different solution. Let's go to this new world because nobody lives there and we can do whatever we want. And by that, we mean pray and work and feel guilty all the time. So Bradford and his community of separatists move over to New England. You know that story. They arrive in 1620 in Plymouth, and they start the Plymouth colony there. Thomas Morton, at that same time, whatever he was doing in England wasn't working out, so he actually gets a charter to start his own colony in New England as well. Except the big difference, William Bradford's colony is through a company. It's through a corporation. So they're working for the Plymouth Bay Company, ostensibly to trade and earn money for the company, at the same time hold this religious community together. Thomas Morton, he gets his charter to come and set up a colony directly from the crown. So it's a royal charter as opposed to a company charter. And he comes over with a gentleman named Captain Wollaston. And that's where we get Mount Wollaston. So Morton and Wollaston come over and they settle this colony about 30-ish miles north of Plymouth. It's almost, it's closer to Boston if you're over there. And they start trading with the native populations there. And they know about the Puritans, they know about the separatists know about them. They don't really like each other. Because Bradford and the Puritans want them to pray and work, and Morton falls in love with this country, meaning the land, and he falls in love especially with the people living already here at the land. He becomes really good friends with all of the native tribes, and he begins to learn their languages, and he begins to learn their customs. And that is way too far afield for Bradford. Bradford starts developing a very bad reputation for Morton. A little side note of what's happening here between Morton and Captain Wollaston. It comes to Morton's attention that Wollaston is advertising for indentured servants to come over and help build the colony. And so these indentured servants, the idea is somebody in England signs an agreement to come in and work and live in the colony for a set number of years. And then at that time, they're released, and they get to keep whatever piece of land or whatever that they were able to develop during their time of servitude. It's really a colonizing mechanism. Morton is recognizing that some of these indentured servants that Wollaston is bringing over are disappearing, and he's not sure what's happening. And it eventually comes to light that Wollaston is luring indentured servants to New England, and once they get to New England, he's selling them into slavery in Virginia. And so Wollaston has this big side hustle going, selling white English people into slavery. So the English, they don't care who they enslave as long as they can make a pretty profit. Morton does not like this. So Morton is able to get the rest of the indentured servants who are still there at the colony, and they basically have a mutiny. And Wollaston escapes to Virginia, where he's been selling all of his slaves, indentured servants, and escapes Morton's justice, and that's where we're going to leave him. You can go look at Captain Wollaston up on your own time, because now Thomas Morton is running the place. His partner is no longer there, and he has a few changes to make. So the first thing he does is banish the entire notion of servitude. Nobody in his colony can be a servant. Nobody can be a slave. Nobody can be a ruler. It's just all democratically run. And in fact, he starts referring to himself not as the captain or as the leader, which is the general phrase used by all of these. He doesn't even accept the title of governor. He calls himself the host, like he's hosting a big party. And everybody else around the camp, all the colonists, the workers, they're just a host as well. So he's already punning on that. He's the host because he's hosting the party, and then there is everybody living there who are the host of people. And the second change he makes is he changes the name. He changes the name from Wollaston to Merrymount, but he spells it very differently. He spells it M-A-R-E, Merrymount. And there's a couple reasons for that. Just like we said, he's punning on the word host. He's also punning on the name Mary. On the one hand, he wants it to be a happy place. He wants it to be actually merry. But then he's looking like, look, there's the ocean over here. Here is the sea. So mer, Latin, French, that means sea. So it's literally the mount by the sea. So good on you, Morton. Good pun. But it's also a Latin grammatical ablative that means the erect phallus. And so he's like, how many other puns can we throw onto this face and make it stick? And he is really good at moving through all of the meanings of those puns whenever he thinks it's going to suit him. Okay, so they didn't get along. And why didn't they get along? Well, we can look at a few examples here. Let's look at Bradford's example. So the great thing about this story is we get both perspectives from it. Bradford wrote about it in his history of New England, or the history of the Plymouth colony. And Morton wrote about it in his book, The New English Canaan. So let's look at Bradford. He's a bit more wordy, which I guess goes with him. So I'm not going to read all of this. I'm just going to lift up a few things. Now to maintain this riotous profligate and profuse excess, Morton, thinking himself lawless and hearing what gain the French and fishermen made by trading pieces, powder, and shot to the Indians, he, as the head of this consortship, began the practice of the same in these parts. First he taught them how to use them, to charge and discharge, and what proportion of powder to give the piece according to the size and bigness of the same. And these things have been done in the same times when some of their neighbors and friends, there meaning the other English settlers, are daily killed by the Indians, or are in danger thereof, and live but at the Indians' mercy. Yea, some have told them how gunpowder is made. This Morton, having thus taught them the use of pieces, he should sell them all he could spare, and he and his consorts determined to send for many out of England, and had by some of the ships sent for above a score. The which being known, and his neighbors meeting the Indians in the woods armed with guns in this sort, it was a terror unto them who lived stragglingly and were of no strength in any place. For Morton would end, besides, they saw they should keep no servants. For Morton would entertain any how vile soever, and all the scum of the country or any discontents would flock to him from all places, if this nest was not broken, and they should stand in more fear of their lives and goods in short time from this wicked and debased crew than from the savages themselves. Okay, so according to Bradford, Morton's doing two things. One is he's selling them guns, and not only is he selling them guns, he's teaching them how to use them, and he's teaching them how to find shot and load them and maintain them. And for Bradford, this is too much. He needs the natives completely unarmed. It's much better to have an Englishman with a gun and a native without than both armed. And as Bradford also includes with that big besides at the end, they don't keep servants. How can you have a civilized country without servants? Morton, on the other hand, his thing is pretty much much more straightforward. The separatists are envying the prosperity and hope of the plantation at Merrymount, which they perceive began to come forward and to be in a good way for the gain of the beaver trade, conspired together against mine host especially, who was the owner of that plantation, and made up a party against him, and mustered up what aid they could, accounting of him as of a great monster. So according to Morton, the separatists, the Puritans, they're just jealous. According to Bradford, Morton is dangerous. both for what he's enabling of the natives, because Morton, he likes them. He thinks, hey, you're using a bow and arrow to hunt game. Here's a gun. You're going to have better luck. And lo and behold, they did. And so the natives kept coming to him and kept buying guns off of him so they could hunt and defend themselves from the English. And the English didn't like that. But for Morton, that doesn't come into it. He's like, they're just jealous because the natives like me and they want to sell to me because I like them and not to the Puritans. So he made some other changes. This is maybe why they say on face value why they don't like each other. But Morton is doing other things. He wants this to be a happy place. He loves the land. He loves tradition. He loves poetry and fun. And so he starts introducing festive days, holidays. And his favorite was May Day, because that's a big old party. And if you're going to build your settlement off of a pun of an erect phallus, you're going to have a maypole. And he wanted the biggest maypole he could get. So on May Day, he ends up getting an 80-foot long maypole, creating it, and to like drive the symbolism home for this being a symbol of fertility, they nail a pair of buck antlers to the top of it, just to show how masculine they are. And then he's like, what? You can't have a May Day without a party. So they start brewing beer and they start handing it out to everyone. And they start dancing, and Morton starts writing his own poetry and starts putting his poetry up on the maypole for everybody to read. And he starts creating May Day hymns for everybody to sing as they celebrate May Day. And he invites everybody to dress up. And because he's good friends with all of the native population in the area, he invites them to attend. So he's bringing all of the native people in, and he's teaching them how to dance around the maypole in a good old-fashioned English way. And he's teaching them some of these Roman and Greek gods that he's pulling from, and stories of fairies, and he's inviting them to add to the festivities themselves. And so the first year they hold a May Day celebration is 1627. So in 1627, Morton basically blindsides the Puritans by doing this. And he invites everybody in the entire region to come in. The Puritans, send some scouts to go and spy, and the Puritans are absolutely horrified by what they see, because there are Englishmen and there are native peoples of all sorts, and they're dancing together and they're drinking together and they're laughing. You can't laugh. And they're mixing cultures into this new celebration. And for Morton, this is the pinnacle. This is the promise of what this land can offer. It is this great meshing of cultures and celebration of each other. So as Morton describes it, he said the inhabitants of Passanegesset, I'm just going to completely guess on that name. That's the native name for that land. Having translated the name of their habitation from the ancient savage name to Merrymount, and being resolved to have the new name confirmed for a memorial to after ages, to devise amongst themselves to have it performed in a solemn manner with revels and merriment after the old English custom, they prepared to set up a maypole upon the festival day, a maypole of Philip and Jacob, and therefore brewed a barrel of excellent beer and provided a case of bottles. He means liquor, to be spent with other good cheer for all comers of the day. And because they would have it in a complete form, they had prepared a song fitting to the time and present occasion. And upon May Day, they brought the maypole to the place appointed with drums, guns, pistols, and other fitting instruments for that purpose, and there erected it with the help of savages that came together for purpose to see the manner of our revels. A goodly pine tree of 80 foot long was reared up with a pair of buck's horns nailed once somewhat near unto the top of it where it stood, as a fair sea marker for directions how to find out the way to mine host of Merrymount. This harmless mirth made by young men that lived in hope to have wives brought over to them that would have saved them the labor of make the voyage to fetch any over, was much distasted of the precise separatists that keep much ado about the tithe of mint and cumin, troubling their brains more than reason would require about things that are indifferent, and from that time sought occasion against mine honest host of Merrymount to overthrow his undertakings and to destroy his plantation quite and clean. So that's what he's saying. What did Bradford see when he went and spied on that May Day celebration? I have to do my great Bradford voice. After this, they fell to great licentiousness and led a dissolute life, powering out themselves into all profaneness. And Morton became a lord of misrule and maintained, as it were, a school of atheism. And after they had got some good into their hands, they got much by trading with the Indians. They spent it as vainly in quaffing and drinking both wine and strong waters in great excess, and as some reported, 10 pounds worth in a morning. They also set up a maypole, drinking and dancing about it many days together, inviting the Indian women for their consorts, dancing and frisking together like so many fairies, or furies rather, and worse practices, as if they had anew revived the feasts of the Roman goddess Flora, or the beastly practices of the mad Bacchanalians. Morton likewise, to show his poetry, composed sundry rhymes and verses, some tending to lasciviousness, and others to the detraction and scandal of some persons, which he affixed to this idle maypole. So Bradford's not liking any of this. They're drunk, they're having a good time, they're dancing, they're consorting, and they're mixing with the native population. So I said that they did a hymn. We're going to read this hymn. We're going to see what got Bradford's ire up so much, this lasciviousness. Artist sketch of the maypole with an overly big poem on it. But this is what Morton wrote and had everybody say on that May Day. Drink and be merry, 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 boys. Let all your delight be in Hymen's joys. Lo, to Hymen now the day is come. About the merry maypole take a roam. Make green garlands, bring bottles out, and fill with sweet nectar freely bout. Uncover thy head and fear no harm, for here's good liquor to keep it warm. Give to the nymph that's free from scorn no Irish stuff nor Scotch overworn. Lasses and beaver coats, come away, ye shall be welcome to us night and day. So as Morton was saying, this is harmless fun. If you're looking at Hymen, you need to realize we're talking about the Greek god of marriage and festivities. Get your minds out of the gutter. I don't mean that at all. Or maybe he did, depending on his things. He likes his puns. So they're singing this. They're inviting all of the lasses in beaver coats, which is absolutely meaning the native women of the area to come and join them night and day, whatever that means. I don't know. And so artist representation of what maybe was seen. So William Bradford sends Miles Standish to see. Miles Standish is the military captain there at Plymouth, and he's looking over at the festivities and not liking what they see. So they go back and they start plotting, Bradford and Standish, about to overthrow and just erase this pestilence from their shores. We can't have this here in New England. And so the following year, in 1628, Morton raises the Maypole again, and Miles Standish and a small militia come in and crash the party. They attack Merrymount shortly after the festivities are done. Morton says that the Puritans are able to overtake the colony because they're all peace-loving and they don't want any trouble. And so they give themselves up into the hands of the Puritans. And William Bradford says, and Miles Standish says as well, that everybody was just too stinking drunk to fight and couldn't. So it was an easy taken. That's why they planned to come in on May Day. So Standish arrests Morton, takes him back to Plymouth. They put him on trial for licentiousness and evil doing. But that's not really a crime according to the company, because again, the Puritans are working for a company, ostensibly. And so they just do what they can. They banish him to an uninhabited island off of the coast of New Hampshire. And the Morton's native friends help him out. They bring him food and water, canoe out to the island, and sustain him until an English ship can pick him up and carry him back to England. While he's in England, he decides to one-up those Puritans for kicking him out of his home. And he's able, with his connections at court, to get the Puritans' charter revoked. And so the Puritans at Plymouth are now on that land illegally. And so he's then going back, he set sail to go back to New England to sort of rub it in their faces and kick them out. But there's a problem. It's called the English Civil War happens. As he's leaving New England, English Civil War breaks out. Charles I is deposed, and the Long Parliament begins. And who controls the Long Parliament? The Puritans. And so Morton gets back to New England. He starts rubbing the news that the separatists' charter is revoked, and then news quickly arrives just after him, saying that King Charles is no longer in power. The Puritans are in power. Puritans can do whatever they want. And so Morton is arrested a second time by the Puritans and charged with sedition this time, because he's a royalist. And, well, he's then banished a second time, but this time is to a much crueler place. This time they banish him to Maine, where he lives the rest of his days, and would end up dying just 2 years later in 4 years later in 1647. He was 71 years old. So there's a quick timeline of everything that we're seeing, and just sort of put everything into context. I've bookended it. On the one hand, you have Shakespeare, and if you ever read Morton's book, The New English Canaan, he quotes Shakespeare a lot. This is how we know he was probably a little bit more educated or just was a theater nerd, one of the two. He knew Shakespeare, he quoted Shakespeare, been to their plays, and several other pieces of literature that were popular in Queen Elizabeth's court. And then sort of their tussles through the years. All right. So there is the story of Thomas Morton and the Maypole of Merrymount. And whether or not you think that Hawthorne was right, that, yeah, there's definitely an allegory buried in there, I will leave that up to you to decide. But do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have one. Who kept the stories alive? If that whole colony was, after the Maypole ceremony was interrupted, and he was arrested, Morton was arrested, who kept those stories alive?
Morton did. With Bradford. So like I said, we have the two versions that I was showing you. We have Bradford's version that he wrote down, and we have Morton's version that he wrote down. So Morton's version, you can find it in a book. It's called The New English Canaan that he wrote. And it's this weird hodgepodge. So some of it is just invective against the separatists that we think were his court briefs, because he was a lawyer, that he used to get their charter revoked. And then he liked his work so much that he's just put it in with the rest of his book. But he also has an entire volume of his book that's basically just nature writing. When I said earlier that he fell in love with this country, meaning the land, that it becomes abundantly clear in his nature writing. He might very well be North America's first nature writer that nobody talks about, because he's a licentious Cretan who tried to introduce maypole ceremonies into Puritan land. And he also talks a great deal about the natives, and it's usually in very, very glowing terms. At one point, he says, there's two types of people in New England. There's the Christians and there are the Indians being far superior. That's a paraphrase straight from his book. And he seems to have made a connection that he doesn't understand, but he wrote about it, and I put it briefly up on the timeline there, about the plagues that were going through the area. And they just all called it the plague. It was probably smallpox that was just wiping out villages. And he makes the connection, because he talks to the natives, that this is very unusual. These plagues didn't happen until the Europeans showed up. And so Morton blames these plagues on Europeans showing up, but he doesn't understand why. He just thinks that like something's going on here. Whereas Bradford comments it too, but more because like we went out exploring and we found this village and everybody was dead. That's Bradford's take on it. And he sort of leaves it at that. Morton wants to figure out why. And he starts chronicling their customs. So a lot of the customs we know from those native tribes, we get from Morton, from that book, the New English Canaan. And then Morton just becomes a punching bag for rest of historians as you go in and you look and see what have other people thought of Thomas Morton. All the way up to like 2016 is the last, one of the most current ones I've seen. they call Morton reckless because of this idea that Bradford talked about, that he was selling guns and ammunition to the native populations. And that was just completely irresponsible, because then how were the English supposed to overpower them? So yeah, there's still a lot of that going on. People don't know what to think of Thomas Morton. In fact, there's this famous short story that was turned into a movie, I think in the 40s, called The Devil and Daniel Webster. And in that short story, the main character is put on trial, and Daniel Webster is defending him, and the devil is prosecuting him. And the devil calls up a jury of the damned. And among the jury of the damned, because it's a good New England thing, you have to have a jury, you have to have a trial by your peers. There's like Benedict Arnold, because he's the main American villain at the time, but there's also Thomas Morton. He's also one of the villains. So yeah, people in New England don't know what to think of Thomas Morton. So he's always that bugbear back there. His name keeps being brought up, but yeah, it's mostly from his own stories that we get his history. And it's an interesting book if you can slog through it. You can find it on Project Gutenberg. It's free.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, that was a long answer. Little tangents. Anything else?
He sounds like my kind of guy.
I suppose if you like dancing and beer and poetry.
Laughter and maple.
Laughter. Those poets, you can't trust them.
Well, thank you, Derik. Did anybody else have a question? I don't want to cut anyone off.
I was just going to ask if anything is left of the original Maypole, or if there's a plaque or anything there now.
I don't know if there's a plaque. There is definitely not anything of the original Maypole, because after Morton was arrested, the Puritans got together and just razed the place. They burnt everything to the ground, because the only way to purify that much sin is by fire.
Were maypoles a British or an English tradition?
Yep. And it was also in other places in Europe, but Morton was getting his from the English tradition of merry old England, back when they had maypoles and celebrations, and it was always that mix of paganism and Christianity, and Morton just accepted that and ran with it and said, hey, if we're mixing paganism and Christianity together, let's mix all these other traditions. So he did.
Thank you. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derik. And for those of you on here, just a couple notes. Next week's forum will be the Building Our Future consultant, Rachel Maxwell, who's a UU national consultant. There's a few forums throughout the week with different leaders, a couple open ones. So this time on Wednesday night, and then Saturday at 11:30. You can find all the links for those in the e-news. And then Sunday the 16th, in a week and a half, there'll be a final report from her on recommendations for next steps and kind of reflections on how the congregation is sitting with all that. And if you haven't yet, there's a survey in the e-news that she's asking congregants to fill out. So if you haven't done that yet, you can find that in today's e-news that came out. A very brief survey, just takes a couple minutes. And then save the date for May 23rd for our revival in person and some online options as well, at the Olmsted History Center at the schoolhouse yard there. I joked with the staff today, it'll be a full day revival. I will, for anybody who hasn't joined in online services, I'll preach every sermon from this past year during our time together. So it'll take all day, but everybody will be caught up then. So no, it'll be good. And you can register. You can register online. I think we'll have plenty of space and room for everyone who's interested. But it'll be a good service, hoping for good weather. So Amy, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, and don't forget the Indigenous Peoples History of the United States book group is meeting tomorrow night at 6:30 for a more in-depth discussion. So if you joined Wednesday a few weeks ago for the shorter truncated version, tomorrow will be the longer one. So
Thanks. Absolutely. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Derik. Appreciate it. Our maypole is still up here in the upper parking lot. Not all the ribbons. I think they've all come down now, but the maypole itself and remnants of ribbons are still there. It hasn't been burned by any local Puritans yet. So we're good for now. Thanks, Derik. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you tonight. Take care.